This week we're going to be talking about the great composers of the classical era. The first one is Joseph Haydn. Haydn was born in 1732 and lived until 1809. He lived a long life for the period and had a wonderful life as a musician and composer. When we're talking about these composers this week, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, we're going to be asking the questions, who were these men and why were they important? For Haydn, the answer to that question is that he was the most prolific classical composer, he was the father of the string quartet, and he was really a master of the pop music of the time. He was considered to be one of the best composers of the classical era, if not the best. Haydn was born in a tiny Austrian village and loved folk songs and dances. Much of his early music in particular is influenced by these songs and dances he grew up listening to. When his parents realized his immense musical talent, they began to give him musical training and eventually got him lessons on instruments and for the voice. At the age of 8, he moved to Vienna to sing as a choir boy in the Cathedral of St. Stephen. Unfortunately, when his voice changed, he was fired by the cathedral and he was left penniless. His family was unable to support him, and so he simply had to try and struggle to survive as a musician with no job. He spent the next few years of his life begging for work. He would teach private lessons to aristocratic children. He performed on violin. He would do anything he could to survive as a musician. After struggling for a while, Haydn was noticed by members of the aristocracy. He was noticed because they not only liked his personality and his perseverance as an artist, but they really loved the sound of his music. He was writing constantly during this period when he was struggling to survive. In 1761, finally, a patron, an aristocrat, the Esterházy family, which was a Hungarian and noble family, heard his music and realized that they wanted to employ him at the court. So the prince, the actual patron, gave him a job that included an income, a home, and food. Again, remember that during the Baroque period and at the beginning of the classical period, musicians were treated as skilled servants. They were owned by the court. This is a small map of where he would have been located. You can see where Vienna is, the art capital of the world at the time, and Esterházy was the seat of the family court he was a part of, is at the bottom of the map. It's a very large area of Hungary. He would travel back and forth occasionally to Vienna and from Esterházy. He also went to Eisenstadt and Rohrau, which is another large city of the time. And can you just imagine, it would take months to go to those places, and sometimes he traveled to London. That could take up to a year to get to London at this time in history. Anyways, the Esterházy family was one of the richest families in Hungary, and so it was a great honor when Haydn was given the job at their court. The court itself included a palace, an opera house, a theater, 2 concert halls, and 126 guest rooms. Just imagine owning that much land and that many buildings. They had a lot of parties and concerts, so Haydn was required to write a lot of music. His life at the court was controlled by his patron, the Esterházy family. He was treated as a highly skilled servant. He was given a home, but he was at the beck and call of the court. He simply had to write whatever they desired. He was required to, for his job, conduct the orchestra, coach singers, oversee the instrumentalists and the instruments themselves, and he ran a music library. Every week, he was supposed to give 2 concerts and do 2 performances of an opera, and then there were daily chamber music performances as well. Haydn was responsible for writing all of the music for these performances. Because he was able to keep up the pace necessary for this court partying life, and because he wrote such beautiful music, he was really developing a great reputation as a beautiful court musician and as a composer during this period. That popularity not only stayed in Esterházy, but went to Vienna when he spent time there, and then traveled across Europe into England, where he became very, very famous because they liked his music. Haydn traveled to London twice in his life, the first visit from 1791 to 1792, and then again, because of his triumphant appearances in England, he was invited back from 1794 to 1795. He composed 12 symphonies during these visits, all of which were very famous and very popular. He was an honored guest by the aristocracy in England. He received an honorary doctorate from Oxford and met and performed for the royal family. In 1795, Haydn returned to Vienna and was considered the most popular composer of the era. While he was in Vienna, he met both Mozart and Beethoven, the two composers we'll be talking about later in the lectures. As he aged, he began to write more and more large choral works. That's not to say that he didn't continue to write string quartets and symphonies and other works, but he just decided he wanted to write other works such as this. He died at the age of 77, and his works today are still performed and loved by many.